Welcome to Life and Liberty Radio with David Householder. I'm Josh Jose, and together, you and I are taking another step toward freedom, both spiritual and political. So get comfortable, breathe in, and ignite your imagination. Envision a society that is spiritually deep and truly free. It's easy if you try.
So here we sit on the brink of another Middle Eastern war. It seems like most of my adult life we've been fighting some kind of war or another in the Middle East, a part of the world we know very, very little about. We don't understand the cultures, we don't understand the issues, but we go in there trying to solve the problems with force. We're going to bomb people to keep them from bombing each other. I just don't understand this. It's hurting our country. It's hurting our country's reputation. It's bankrupting us. And it has literally maimed a whole generation of young American men and women. I've got the top 10 reasons here for our president, President Barack Obama, not to launch military strikes against the Assad regime in Syria. Number 10, it is unconstitutional. Everyone is waiting for the president to make his decision. All the major newspapers, all of the major cable news outlets are saying we're waiting for the president's decision. Well, it's not the president's decision. In fact, when President Bush was deciding whether or not to strike Iran, Joe Biden said something interesting. He doesn't have the authority to do that, and if he does, without Congress, I will initiate impeachment proceedings. But now Joe Biden is all for his boss, President Obama, doing exactly the same thing. And the United States Constitution could not be clearer. We have three branches of government, the judicial, the executive, and the legislative or Congress. And the Founding Fathers clearly and intentionally wanted Congress, and only Congress, to have the authority to wage war, because it's in the executive's interest to wage war constantly, because waging war centralizes power in the executive. So if this went to Congress for an actual declaration of war against the Assad regime, it would fail. Why? Why would it fail? Because America is war-weary. We've done this too long, and we have nothing to show for it. And this is just one more war in the same direction. Have we learned nothing? That's number 10. Number 9, Assad's enemies. Assad is brutal. He's a brutal dictator. He's in charge of Syria. And his enemies, if we were to get rid of him, regime change, would be Al-Qaeda, the Salafists, and other radical Islamists. Between him, he's a military authoritarian guy, and the Islamists, they have about 80% of the population behind them. If you get rid of Assad, you get the Islamists. If you get rid of the Islamists, you get Assad. Just like in Egypt. We've got the authoritarian military types, and we've got the radical Muslims. We don't have a majority coming out of any other group. So if we get rid of Assad, we get Al-Qaeda in charge. The alternative is simply not better. There simply are no North Carolina Republicans or Minnesota Democrats waiting to take over when Assad falls. That was number 9. Number 8, there are at least 11 major ethnicities in Syria. And people aren't going to change their mind just because Assad is toppled. Those same coalitions of same ethnicities will continue to prop up another leader. It's not like he's some evil dictator, and the minute he's gone, the whole thing will fall apart. That happened in Germany when Hitler was toppled. This is not going to happen here, because we have lots of fragmented, sort of a crazy quilt of ethnicities in Syria, and these people are not going to change their minds just because Assad is taken out and authority is wrested from him. That's number 8. Number 7, Syria is in the midst of a civil war. The United States has had our own civil war back in the 1860s, and the high point of that war, of course, was Gettysburg, where the South and the North had a just amazing conflagration, tens of thousands of casualties, a Vietnam-sized casualty count in just a couple of days. Can you imagine, if you would, at the Battle of Gettysburg, if the French army or the British army had shown up and decided to back one side and take the other side out, that wouldn't have been good for America, because America needed to fight this out ourselves. We needed to come to grips with our original sin of slavery, and we had to fight it out. We did, and it was tragic. It was horrible, and Europe could have stopped it at one point, but we wouldn't have settled the issue. Even after the Civil War, toward the end of the Civil War, even after all that bloodshed, we barely were able to free the slaves with the 13th Amendment and the 14th and the 15th. Barely. If an outside force had come in, we wouldn't have dealt with our issues. Civil wars, unfortunately, are times when nations grow up and deal with their issues, and for us to fix this for Syria would ensure one thing: they wouldn't fix their issues for themselves. That's number 7. Number 6. Assad, for all of his brutality, protects a large Christian minority. Christians have been in Syria. I had lunch with a Syrian Christian yesterday who lives here in California. Christians have lived in Syria since the very first century of Christianity. Paul came to faith in Damascus, and that was right in the Bible, in the book of Acts. And there have been Christians there ever since. They have not been a majority for many, 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 many centuries, but they've been a respected minority. They're a highly educated class, and they have filled many important positions in the governments all the way down the line. And they do things for the society that Muslims are unable to do, such as incorporating corporations and certain banking things, and it's very important to have them there. Well, Assad, for all his brutality, protects Christians because he knows it's good for the country. Now, we got rid of Mubarak in Egypt, who also protected Christians, and we got rid of Saddam Hussein, who also protected Christians in Iraq. All three of these kind of brutal dictators protect Christians for good reasons, because this educated mercantile class is good for their countries. And we had Tariq Aziz, who was the foreign minister of Saddam Hussein, who was a Christian. And we have Christians in the government in Egypt. But what happens is, when these military authoritarian dictators get toppled, they get replaced by Islamists who don't like Christians and would rather the GDP of their country were cut in half rather than let Christians be in charge of anything. Now, what has happened since we got rid of Mubarak and since we got rid of Saddam Hussein? Well, we have had a mass exodus of tens and even hundreds of thousands of Christians who have lived in these countries for generations and centuries, and they're leaving. Los Angeles is full of Christians who've come here from Iraq. Egyptian Christians are all over the place. My doctor here in Southern California is an Egyptian Christian, and it's just a wave of out-migration from these countries, and that's exactly what's going to happen if the Assad regime is toppled. Yes, Assad is a brutal dictator. He'd be replaced by another brutal dictator from the other side, and the Christians would disappear. That's number 6. Number 5. Chance is that Syria could fall apart, and that would be okay. And why is that? There's no such thing as Syria. Syria is an artificial country invented in the earlier part of the 1900s by a deal between the French and the British after World War I. After World War I, the Middle East was carved up, and the victors in World War I, France and Britain, carved up the area. Britain would be in charge of Iraq, of Jordan, and of Palestine, and the French would be in charge of Syria and Lebanon. And all of those countries were created out of whole cloth, ignoring the ethnic boundaries and all of the issues there. And that's created incredible problems in what we now call Israel, with the Palestinian Jewish situation there. It's caused incredible problems in Iraq. There's also no such thing as Iraq or an Iraqi. Nobody has Iraqi ethnicity. There's Sunnis, there's Shiites, and there's Kurds, and there's Christians. And in Syria, it's even more complicated. There's at least 11 major minorities, and these groups are all vying for power, and they were all lumped together, and it was called Syria in this deal between the French and the British, where they just took out a map and started drawing lines arbitrarily. There's no such thing as Syria. If Syria pulls out of this, fine. If they don't, they can rearrange the map in a way that works better. We don't have to prop up Syria. Number 4, this puts Israel at risk. You know, Israel can take care of itself. The only time Israel's really in trouble in the Middle East anymore since 1973 when they got the bomb, the only time they've ever been in trouble anymore is when the United States acts up. And when we were shooting up Iraq, what happened? That's when Scuds were landing on Haifa and Tel Aviv. This is crazy. It's absolutely crazy that we put Israel at risk every time we go over there and do things in an area where we don't understand. That's number 4. Number 3, Assad is the number 1 ally of Iran. Our number 1 ally in the world is arguably perhaps Germany, perhaps the United Kingdom, perhaps Japan, perhaps Israel, perhaps Canada. It's hard to know exactly what our main ally would be, but those are our best friends in the world, those countries. And can you imagine if somebody attacked one of those countries? We would do something. Well, the number 1 ally of Iran, one of our biggest enemies in the area, is Assad. And if we attack him, we stir up a hornet's nest in Iran, and they go to war with us. And we could be embarking this week on a 15-year war with Iran. Now, I don't know that it's going to take 15 years, but Iraq took at least 10, and this is a much bigger, much more developed, much more sophisticated country, much more capable of doing us great damage. And this is an excuse which the neocons have wanted to go to war with Iran forever, would love to take. This is their chance to go to war with Iran. Well, we don't need to go to war with Iran because half of the people in Iran, the Persian people, the Farsi people, really like America. And they almost have a majority. The last election was very, very close. And if we were to go to war with Iran, that would alienate that group. Why don't we just wait till that group wins the election so we could be friends with Iran? So we don't have to go with a war with Iran. That could be it could be devastating. It could take a generation. And America doesn't need to do that. That's number 3. Number 2, this would ensure Iran striving for a nuke. If we go after Iran's best friend in the region, Assad, and granted, the guy is definitely a difficult guy. There's no question. But if we went after him, the best friend of Iran, Iran is going to be highly motivated to get a nuke to defend itself. And we don't need to give them more motivation to get nuclear weapons. And number 1. Number 10, unconstitutional. Number 9, get rid of Assad, we get al-Qaeda, the Salafists, and radical Islamists in charge. Number 8, there are at least 11 major ethnicities with deep loyalties. They're not going to change their minds. Number 7, it's their civil war. Civil wars are when countries grow up and you can't win that for them or lose that for them. Number 6, Assad protects Christians. Number 5, if Syria falls apart, it's not the end of the world. Number 4, it puts Israel at risk. Number 3, could be starting what could be a 15-year war with Iran. Number 2, it would ensure Iran striving for a nuke. Number 1, Russia is an ally of Syria. Russia has a navy base in Syria. Russia has been allied with Syria for a long, long time. Russia is easily the second most powerful country in the world militarily. Not China, not India, not the UK. It would be Russia. Russia has many more nukes than all of them, perhaps as many as all of them put together. We have to get a ride with the Russians to the space station because we don't have a way to get there anymore. This is an advanced country, a very large country, and for most of my childhood, we spent a huge chunk of our gross domestic product just basically reinforcing our defenses against Russia. It was a waste. We put our best and brightest into battling the Russians in what was called the Cold War. And we went to just levels of insanity where we had people sitting there with buttons that were designed to destroy whole cities of people having dinner and sending their kids to school. And they did the same to us. Do we really want to return to that? Since 1989, we've at least been frenemies with Russia. This would change that. Do you really want to go back to the insanity of a Cold War II? A Cold War II. We don't need to do that. We really don't need to do that. There's really so many downsides here. Here's a conclusion. when I'm making a big decision, I try to ensure against catastrophic downside and allow for good upside. Military action does exactly the opposite, opens us up to many different forms of catastrophic downside, and help me see the upside. Let's not go to war in Syria. Well, that's all for today on Life and Liberty Radio. Thanks so much for sharing this part of your spiritual journey with me. Now, the views on this program are not necessarily those of my advertisers, sponsors, places I work, or do business with. They're purely my own, but I'm sharing them with you, so share your ideas with me. Write me on Twitter at Liberty House, LIBERTYHOUS, no E. Until next time, let's continue dreaming and working for a free and spiritually grounded society.